On this episode of What the Ship, we look at the top 5 maritime stories as of April 9th, 2025. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. Just back from Washington, D.C., the U.S. Navy League Sea Air Space Expo. Got a chance to hang around with some interesting people and also meet some new ones, get some updates on what's going on the defense military side of shipping, always an important one to do. Heard a speech from the commanding general, General Randall Reed of U.S. Transportation Command, that had my heart aflutter. I have never heard a U.S. military flag officer, or any military officer for that matter, speak so eloquently about the U.S. Merchant Marine. It got a standing ovation from me and several other merchant mariners. It was great. I hope to get it on the channel. It was fantastic. General Reed, I salute you, sir. Great speech. Just fantastic. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this. We got 5 topics. We're going to run from tariffs all the way to the Red Sea. A lot of ship to cover here in a short period of time. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. Hey, what's going on with shipping? It has been a shipful day today. So I've done this video 3 times now. First time the video, something happened with it, just crapped out. The second time I was trying to cut it down. Third time I thought I had it. I was coming home to do one last review before I posted it. And then I see this is out. President Trump has paused almost all the new tariffs. He's put a 90-day hold or pause on the tariffs, with the exception of China, which has a increased reciprocal tariff up to 125%. All other tariffs are holding at 10% at this time. Now, I thought this is terrible. I just did this whole video, but it seems like this has been a mess all day. Note this story over here. Trump's top trade official wasn't informed of tariff delay until after the announcement. So the White House is a little bit off kilter here. Good buddy John Conrad was at the White House today for the signing of the executive order on shipbuilding, and he was there all day. And I asked him, I said, so the ship order got signed? And he said, I don't know, because it's not clear it was. There's a Bloomberg story out now saying it has been signed. There's also a Reuters story coming out now that's saying that. We just haven't seen it yet. So I'm going to wait to comment on it until I read the executive order, and I can do a whole video on it. But in the meantime, for the rest of this video, I'm going to keep the tariff section in here, but I'm going to cut out what's not relevant anymore. So if it seems a bit choppy and jumpy, my apologies, but I didn't want to put out a video and it's already, overcome by events. Anyway, back to the video. So this story from Reuters over at GCAP: Trump's tariffs medicine engulfs the market. Man, if you saw the market at the end of last week, you saw that bloodbath that was the market. Came down really hard. And that's what Trump's tariffs are doing. This story builds on that. Trump administration nations are lining up to start trade talks with the U.S. after tariffs. One of the reasons we think President Trump instituted such huge tariffs was to get responses from countries to try to come back and get reciprocal trade agreements. We saw them do that earlier with Colombia. When you look at what President Trump has done, these are the top 30 U.S. container import countries. This is from Liner-Lytica, a piece by Sam Chambers over at Splash 24/7, running from China, which imports 11 million countries into the United States last year. They represent 41% of all U.S. containers that come in. They're looking at a tariff of 56%, but that is changing, as we'll talk about. And it runs down the gamut from China all the way down to Bangladesh, with the minimum tariff rate being 10%. The trade weighted tariff rate on average is roughly around 36%. This is demonstrably higher than the previous tariff rate. If you look at tariff rates, historically speaking, they were high in the 1890s. This is basically where you have to go back to early 1890s, early 1900s to see a tariff rate that we're equivalent to today. If you look at the tariff rate in the 90s and the early 2000s, you're talking about single digits. I mean, below 5%. Talking about 1 to 3% basically is what been the tariff rate. So this is one of the reasons why you're seeing President Trump respond with these tariffs. This story from Reuters on April 9th, Trump tariffs kick in and China and Europe hit back. So we were expecting this to happen today, and it sure did. So this story on Lloyd's by Joshua Mission: China raises tariffs on U.S. goods to 84%. So trade war is happening. I got dinged the other day because I talked about a trade war. I don't know what the definition of a trade war is, but I'm pretty sure this is it. Beijing has increased its retaliatory tariffs following President Trump's executive order on April 8th. That increased tariffs on Chinese imports 50 additional percent from 34% up to 84%. At the same time, you see this bounce back early this week. This is Greg Miller's story from Lloyd's List. Surprise bounce for shipping stocks amid Trump market carnage. Multiple bulk commodity shipping stocks rose by double low digits or high single digits. Crude tankers appear poised to gain from a higher Saudi Arabian export in the near term, although global recession risks weigh forward outlook. Trade effects on trade flows and ton miles remain uncertain. On the Chinese side, what we're seeing is Chinese government is helping its container firms, particularly Costco Holding, buy back their stocks. So this Bloomberg story from April 8th, Chinese shipping earns face harder than expected tariff hit as recession risks rise. This story over at Lloyd's List by Xishan Shen goes into details about this. Chinese state-owned shipping firms are accelerating their buybacks to support the stock market amid rising tensions. Authorities are directing market support efforts with firms reporting buyback progress frequently and financial institutions to boost the stock holdings. Goes on, markets saw a modest rebound helped by buybacks, intervention of, quote, national team. You know, it helps when your state-run government owns state-run corporations, and you can get that. Beijing's restrained response to new U.S. tariffs. Then we have this, container bookings into the U.S. slumped by 2/3 in the space of one explosive tariff week. If you looked at the numbers for the first quarter of 2025, January, February, March, containers were up, cars were up, everything was up. Usually first quarter is a downward quarter because you're coming out of the big, huge third and fourth quarter at the end of the year for holidays. Well, first quarter was up across the board in the U.S. You look at the Port of LA, look at Georgia ports for cars. Everything's up through everything because why? Because everybody's front loading. They were trying to get in front of the tariffs. So a lot of cargo was coming into the United States. What does that mean? Can we expect to see that kick off? Well, yes, we can. That story indicates to us that what we're seeing is less cargo coming across right now into the second quarter. So the second quarter is going to be a really bad quarter. Usually second quarter is above first quarter in terms of numbers, with third quarter even higher. That's not going to happen here. We're going to see a slump off because everybody is kind of waiting and seeing. And then the last part that came out that was a really interesting story, I didn't know where to fit it in the 5 today, but I'm going to put it here, is this story. This is over at FreightWaves. Trump revokes the duty-free access for Chinese e-commerce. Consumers to pay more as online retailers lose expedited clearance for low-value imports. This is the end of de minimis shipments coming out of China and Hong Kong. So there's a rule that if you package something and it's under $800 in value and ship it to the United States and declare it as a separate shipment, there's no duty on that. So what companies like Temu and all these other big kind of retailers do is when you make an order, they pack that package as long as it's under $800 and declare it a shipment, even though it's in a container that contains dozens, if not hundreds of those packages. They just turn one container into multiple shipments. And that gets you out of paying duty. Now, the idea was to promote e-commerce. The problem is e-commerce went through the roof during the supply chain crisis. We hit like 2025 levels of e-commerce in 2020. And CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, are not prepared to deal with that volume. And when President Trump initially called for the end of de minimis, the CBP could not match that. Now they can. So now they're going to institute this. This goes into effects on shipments coming out of Hong Kong and China on May 2nd. All right, let's go ahead and jump to our second story. So story number 2 deals with the International Maritime Organization. This is the United Nations shipping arm. Now, shipping has dealt with the IMO quite a bit. And if you're a frequent follower of the show, you know that one of the issues that's full front in shipping right now is greenhouse gas emissions. IMO since 2020 has been reducing the amount of emissions coming from ship. And in 2020, it was sulfur emissions. The new one is by 2050, the goal set out was to reduce carbon emissions from ships based on 2008 levels to 50%. Well, the IMO has amped that up. They want to go to carbon neutral by 2050. That has put a huge onus on the shipping industry to work with shipyards to get new technologies of vessels that meet those compliances. And some have argued that is raising the cost of shipping. It's also helping China, who is the largest shipbuilder in the world, because if you build a ship in 2025 and within 10 years the emission standards change so much, you either have to buy a new ship or repair that ship and do upgrades to it. The place you're going to go is back to China. And so there's a lot of arguments that what the IMO is trying to do, which is noble, don't get me wrong, I want clean air, I definitely want it. However, ships, the largest objects ever made by humans, to make them carbon neutral, I have the solution. I have the solution for IMO. It's called a sailboat. The problem is you can't make a 24,000 TEU sailboat. It is the most fuel efficient, carbon efficient, pollution efficient mode of transportation there is. If you move a pound of cargo by ship, do it by road, do it by rail, do it by aviation, the ship emits the least amount. The problem is that you don't have 20,000 ton cars, rails, or planes. And so your emissions tend to be concentrated into one area. So IMO is trying to reduce that. However, the way they're trying to do that now is by imposing a carbon tax, a tariff, a global tariff on this. And there were two meetings in the IMO, one last week, one this week. The United States was at the first meeting. They left during the interperiod, and they were supposed to be there for the second one. Well, things have gone a little bit differently. So this will make John Conrad over at G-Captain very happy because he's been talking about this for a long time. This is Mike Schuller's piece at G-Captain. U.S. withdraws from critical IMO climate meeting, threatens retaliation over emission pricing. Again, the plan is to implement this kind of global tariff on carbon emissions. And those monies collected by the IMO would be used to assist in greenhouse gas reductions in developing nations and port developments around the world. But it's basically a global tax. The IMO is continuing on. This story from Sea Trade Maritime. U.S. less, the IMO carries on regardless. So the meeting is taking place. The U.S. delegates are not there. I should note that they had a working group this past week. 1,000 people from 173 IMO nations, 1,000-person working group, and their goal is to work on this. But I want to go to this piece by Richard Mead over at Lloyd's List. I think it's one of the best. Last-minute U.S. intervention in IMO threatens to derail climate negotiation. They're threatening member states with reciprocal measures should they agree to a carbon levy. So U.S. only has about 80-something vessels, 80, 90 vessels in international trade. If we have to pay a carbon levy on those U.S. vessels, we're going to impose a same carbon level to come into the United States. So basically a double duty on that. And that can cause a lot of problems. The emission reduction measures would impose substantial economic burdens on the sector and drive inflation globally. That's what the U.S. is arguing. They're saying that you're trying to decarbonize too quickly and you're forcing companies to lay up ships, pay this excessive amount of money, and the technology has not quite caught up with it. Now, the argument always is, well, if you don't force this, it's never going to happen. I understand both sides, but this is the perspective from the U.S. Finally, the U.S. rejects any and all efforts to impose economic measures against its ships based on greenhouse gas emissions or fuel choice. It's an interesting argument. If the U.S. rejects the IMO greenhouse gas emissions, will that cause ships to come to the U.S. registry? Don't know. The IMO has been given kind of carte blanche. Understand, when the United Nations was formed, the U.S. got the United Nations in the United States. The British wanted shipping, and so they got the IMO in London. And the International Maritime Organization, which does all these international conventions, they do the marine pollution, they do the safety of life at sea conventions, they set the mandates for ships, they allow port state control so that countries can inspect foreign vessels within their waters. They do a lot. However, this issue is a polarizing issue. Because they're pushing this greenhouse gas emissions to such a level, it has caused a lot of disruption in the shipping industry. You literally are building a ship today in 2025 that you don't know if you're going to be able to operate within 5, 10, or 15 years. And if you have to replace that vessel, you have to go to China because China is the largest shipbuilder in the world. If you have to repair that vessel, install some sort of scrubber or mechanical device on it to clean emissions, you probably have to go to China. This is obviously China pushing this quite a bit. And this is creating the backlash. All right, let's go to story number 3. So story number 3 takes us over to Panama. If you saw my Panama video, first of all, great rendition of Panama by me on the video. I recommend it. How this has not been cut into a single and right now is rocking iTunes, I have no idea. But if you hadn't caught that, you can go catch it in the video. But the issue with Panama has been the U.S. has been very vocal, extremely vocal, about Chinese control of the Panama Canal. In particularly the fact that China owns terminals at both ends of the canal. Well, we're seeing a new issue come out on this I want to update you on. So first, the ports, the terminals, the 2 terminals on each end of the canal that Chinese companies own, they're owned by CK Hutchinson. It's a Hong Kong-based shipping firm. terminal operator? Well, there's a proposal put forward to buy CK Hutchinson. This is done by BlackRock. This is a U.S. investment group working with TIL. TIL is the shore-based logistics firm for Mediterranean shipping, the largest container shipping firm in the world. But what we're seeing here is a bit of a blowback by China against this. So this story from Bloomberg: Panama alleges port concession violations, increasing pressure on CK Hutchinson. So Panama's top auditor accused Hutchinson of wrongdoing, providing a potential pathway for this Central American country to wrest control of the canal facilities caught up in a diplomatic tug of war between U.S. and China. So Hutchinson is making this deal. The Chinese government has since intervened and said, no, you can't sell it. But the argument is, okay, you've already begun this deal. You have got to follow through. But now the country of Panama is threatening to seize the terminals in the port. This goes to another story on April 8th. Secretary of Defense Hegseth is vowing to take back Panama Canal from China's influence during the visit. He goes on that he will not allow China to weaponize the canal. He says, together we will take back the Panama Canal from China's influence. That statement is a really interesting. Together, the statements coming out of the U.S. have changed. It's no longer kind of confrontational against Panama, but it's now U.S. and Panama versus China. That is how that narrative has changed. And you can see that here in some of the statements that are coming out. So together, you see this, China did not build this canal. China does not operate this canal. China will not weaponize this canal. Together with Panama in the lead, we will keep the canal secure and available for all nations. 40% of the traffic, $270 billion of the traffic going through the canal is American. I should note that the second biggest amount going through the canal is Panama. So the U.S. is not talking about wresting control from Panama. It's talking about wresting control from China. Now, we can debate this all day long, whether or not China has influence over the canal. They do have investment in the canal. They have one terminal on the Pacific side, one terminal on the Atlantic side. They are offering money for building the fourth bridge over the canal. There's investments in copper extraction, in developments. Since then, Panama has renounced their involvement in the Belt and Road. But now this issue over CK Hutchinson is the next big sticking point. If BlackRock and TIL and MSC buy CK Hutchinson, that removes China's influence in ports, and we're seeing this rise on a level. There was just a story in Australia about Chinese control in the port of Darwin, for example. So this is, again, another potential issue we're seeing. All right, let's go to our next story. Story number 4 deals with the U.S. Trade Representative in the Section 301 hearing on port fees. Did an extensive video with Ross Kennedy on this. The Section 301 is talking about imposing port fees on ships that are built in China, companies that own Chinese-built vessels, or companies that are invested in having new ships built in China. So 2-day-long hearing. We don't have an audio. We don't have a video on this. Again, I'm going to have to do sock puppets because all we have is a transcript. And so far, it's only been the transcript from the first day that's been released. And it's huge. It's a really long transcript. But the port fee issue is coming into a newer light. We're supposed to get a decision from the U.S. Trade Rep on April 17th, whether to do a modified port fee or to have additional hearings. Well, here are the stories that are out on this. So Reuters has a story out. Trump administration considers softening the China ship fee plan after pushback. So the White House and the Office of Trade Representative are involved in drafting this. The initial idea was that the fees could top as much as $3 million per port fee. And the hearings brought to light a lot of issues, one of which was that why are you treating all ships the same? They are much different. If you have a 10,000 box container ship, that's a lot different than a 1,000 box container ship. If you have $1 million fee on a 10,000 box ship, that's $100 a box. That's nothing. I'm sorry. Spread across the entire contents, you'll never, ever see that cost. If it's on a 1,000 box, that's $1,000, and that could be a sizable amount of money that appears on an item, especially if you have a big bulk item coming through. And the issue here was a lot of Caribbean shippers came out, a lot of small container shippers come out, and the trade rep sat there and said, listen, we want to get your feedback. That's why we're having 2 days worth of this. And that leads us to this story by Lloyd's List, Greg Miller. USTR signals that port fees are coming, but plan will be changed. So Jameson Greer, before a hearing in the U.S. Senate, said that some elements of the draft port fee plan will not be implemented and fees will not be stacked. In other words, you won't get multiple fees. You'll be charged one fee, probably the max fee. Greer suggested the final rule will provide some protection for U.S. commodity exporters. I mean, we heard more about bananas in that hearing than anything else. Port fees are expected to concentrate U.S. containerized imports into America's largest ports, causing supply chain disruptions. That last part is really interesting because the ocean carriers are sky is falling quite a bit. If you read the World Shipping Council and some of the major shipping firms' comments, they're talking about how this is going to bankrupt firms. It's going to cause us to shift from going to 4 ports down to 2. We're going to have to bring our big ships in and not so many medium-sized ships. We're going to reduce the number of sailings. Again, if you're getting $1 million port fee on a 10,000 box ship, is this the end of the world for you? I don't think so. I really don't. And I also think that the ocean carriers are using this to kind of play a game here a bit about the escalation of rates and fees, cancellation of voyages, blank sailing. I think they're being a little bit extreme with it. Now, I'm saying this is different than the tariffs. This hasn't even gone into effect yet. This is not the tariffs. This is the port fees, and we just don't know what the port fees are going to be yet. And so to sit there and make the statement that this is going to cause us to rejiggle our networks yet, so you know what the port fees are, I don't know how you justify that yet. I really don't. And what we're waiting for is see what happens on April 17th. I envision we'll see maybe a new recommendations come out, maybe a call for moments. The wild card in all this is what happens if these port fees are rolled into an executive order. That can happen tomorrow. Could happen this afternoon for all we know. But that is the kind of the big variable. All right, let's go to our last story. All right, last story deals with the Red Sea. And the Red Sea and the Houthi have been a kind of a core issue we've been doing over the past year or so. We know that the U.S. has initiated renewed strikes against the Houthi. The Truman Battle Group, following its repair after the collision north of Suez, came through the Suez. Captain Chris Chowder-Hill is back on board. He had been commanding officer of the Eisenhower. Now he's on Truman. And the Truman have been launching strikes against the Houthi repeatedly for several weeks now. Also, the U.S. has moved a substantial strike force into Diego Garcia. At least 6 B-2 bombers are there, and they're launching strikes against the Houthi, including dropping some bunker-busting bombs. So a concentrated assault against the Houthis. That brings us this story. Trump administration's progress against resilient Houthi militants remain murky. So Trump has boasted that he's decimated the Houthis, these Iranian-backed militias. The question is, what good is it doing? Understand, military issue alone is not going to destroy the Houthis. I've said this from the very beginning. You can bomb the Houthis all day. The Saudis did this for a decade. You're not going to convince the Houthis to give up. They're ideological. They're not going to be convinced by the military. However, what you can do is convince the Iranians to stop backing them. And we have economic leverage over the Iranians because we're boycotting their oil. That's the mechanism that needs to be done. The other element here that's really important is the insurance companies. We're not so much trying to deter the Houthis as much as to deter the insurance companies to lessen the war risk insurance. This story over at Lloyd's by Bridget Dykin. Red Sea monthly transits jump despite heightened tensions. Collapse of the ceasefire has not deterred owners and operators from Red Sea returns. Remember, we were down about 40% ship passages, about 60% volume through that area. Passages through the choke points are at the highest level in more than 6 months. Transits remain within the new normal range. This is the IMF Port Watch system, looks at transits through. Here we see Suez Canal transits. Back in the day, before the Houthi, we were averaging about 70 to 80 passages. And then during it, we go down to the 30s, 40s, seeing a little bit of a tick up here at the very end. If you look at Bab el-Mandab, cheer, remember the tradition here at What's Going On with Shipping. When we mention the BAM, you take a drink of whatever you happen to have. I know it sounds weird, but again, it's tradition here. If you look at the BAM passages, they drop down precipitously. They're down quite a bit. And what this indicates to us is if we're starting to see that uptick again, that means some ships are going through. What needs to be done is not just a military campaign against the Houthis, but an economic and political campaign. The U.S. needs to be going to the War Risk Insurance Committee up in London, convincing those who offer war risk insurance to lower that percentage. Remember, what was driving ships to go around Africa wasn't the Houthis. It was a 0.5% to 1% war risk insurance that was making it uneconomical. Yes, the companies were worried about their ships. They were worried about their crews. They're good Samaritans, those shipping companies, but they're also worried about their bottom line. And the bottom line was, if it's costing me, $1 million, to go through the Red Sea, but it's costing me much more to go, or it's costing me more to go through the Red Sea, I'm going to pay $1 million in extra fuel to go around Africa because it's cheaper and it's safer and it saves my crews and ships. I'm going to do that all day long. What the U.S. needs to do is cut the funding, cut the backing of the Houthis, get them to stop shipping missiles and equipment, have the Iranians pull the plug, and more importantly, convince the shipping firms that they can go through this passage, get the war risk insurance reduced. That will open everything up. That's the key to opening the Red Sea. I've been saying that from the very beginning of this. I hope you enjoyed those 5 stories. Man, we covered a lot there. But again, in the 3-4 days I've been gone, a lot of shit happened. So I wanted to make sure we can get ourselves back up to speed. We got a lot of other stuff going on. There's a container ship fire up in the North Sea. I've got firsthand accounts from the events on board Stena Immaculate off the coast of Great Britain, the ramming from the Salong versus Stena Immaculate. We've got the issues coming out of the Sea Airspace Expo I want to talk about. We've got this executive order being signed at the White House today. So we're going to talk about all this shipload of ships and all the detail we have. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below. You can go to Patreon, become a monthly, yearly subscriber. You can give it a big thumbs up. You can share it across social media. There are tons of ways you can support this page. I appreciate it, and it's great to be back. Until our next episode, Sal, signing off.